I'm Todd Jones, recovering from 30 years as a sports writer. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with some of the best sports writers of our time, who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experienced firsthand some of the biggest sports moments of the past half century. We'll share stories behind the stories, some we've only told each other. Pull up a seat on Press Box Access. Jeff Jacobs and I first met while covering the Olympics many years ago. I immediately felt a bond. We're kindred spirits. We're both a little crazy about the craft. I mean that with all respect for Jeff. He's a writer's writer. Readers have benefited from his passion and talent since the late 1970s. Jeff is still writing for Hearst, Connecticut media after spending 34 years at the Hartford Courant, where he earned a reputation as one of the nation's top sports columnists. We're lucky that he's walked into our pub. Jeff, have a seat. It's an open tab on Press Box Access. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Todd. I'm really excited about this. I saw the names before me, and I'm a little intimidated.
Oh, no, there's no intimidation.
Got some bigwigs on there.
No, we're all one crazy tribe here. It is great to talk with you again, Jeff. It's been way too long, and I do feel a kindred spirit with you. I think, I always admired the fact that the words mattered to you. You were somebody who would bleed on the keyboard. Is that right?
Yeah, it's true. It's so different now. First thing you told me was don't get involved in like any problems with journalism today and all that sort of stuff. And so I'll open up with this. But like it was so different in that when I was in college and coming out, everything was about the written word, writing well, reporting well, and being involved in all sorts of sports. And now it seems like you have to be involved in 28 different platforms, and it's best to be involved in one sport. So someone can call you up and say, hey, can you do video on volleyball? Right. Can you write about volleyball? It's so different. So yeah, I grew up with the written word, and it's funny because I got to introduce my buddy, Jerry Sullivan, who I grew up down the street from in Newport, Rhode Island.
Buffalo writer.
Just down the street. Yeah, he longtime sports columnist of the Buffalo News, and we just grew up together, playing sports, writing about sports. The big thing with us, we used to read the sporting news. I know a lot of people talk about Sports Illustrated, and granted, we read it, but the sporting news had about, at the time, a half dozen or so columnists from around the country that came every week.
Syndicated.
Dick Young, Leonard Carpet, who was known as like the decimal points in his briefcase, and Larry King wrote for them for a while, believe it or not. And Art Spander, I think, who I had on, he was one of them, and Joe Falls from Detroit. So we would read those guys all the time, and it gave us a different types of columnists. But besides all the baseball and all that was in the sport, it was those columnists, they spurred us along.
So you basically carried on the lineage of all those great writers at Sporting News that you read growing up. You became one of those guys who the words did matter. And, you covered hockey for many, many years as a hockey beat reporter, and then went on to be a general columnist. 45 years in the business, I believe, almost half a century, and then including 34 at the Hartford Courant, and where you were the sports columnist for 23 years. And when you think about all those years and all those experiences, if somebody were to stop you on the street and says, Jeff, what was it like to be a sports writer back in the day? What comes to mind?
Deadlines. The deadlines. that was, I can only tell you, you haven't seen someone panic till you've seen me covering the Whalers games up in Montreal or Quebec, and that was in the old Adams division, and you had the old acoustic couplers that you'd put the phone into from the Radio Shack, and the sound quality from the phones crossing international borders wasn't particularly good, and then the Canadians would just score goal after goal after goal on the Whale, and it'd be like they'd play this Bleu Blanc Rouge that every time they scored. So every time I tried to send, I'd get nothing but like that mishmash. You've probably been there. That mishmash of just not letters, but
symbols and noises.
Symbols, yeah. And that was that was panic.
Was there one particular night where you just felt like that's one that caused you extreme pain?
I don't know. They all run together because the Whale always lost. It was always, put it this way, it was always Gila. The NHL was always accused by Harry Sidney of the Bruins of calling penalties early in the third period to lift the Canadians to yet another victory. So the worst point was early in the third period, trying to send your second period running, and Gila Fleur come out in the power play and nail one, and then the place went nuts, and I couldn't send. And it'd be like you have to go back on the operator. She might be speaking French, and then back and forth. It was a mess.
A few years off your life, right?
Yeah, it did. We'll get to that in a while. But yeah, that's one thing I think about. I just think about two parts of the brain when you were a sports writer. One was like the really organized part with the names. And with hockey, there were a lot of European names that you could just butcher on deadline. And the numbers, all those things. And on the other side, being creative. And I've watched some masters. Mark Wicker comes to mind when I was working in the Philadelphia area. Could just write something in 45 minutes to an hour and just be spot-free in terms of like errors, and then just be great writing. Mike Lupica later on, when I used to watch him like at Yankees games right there in October, set the scene like few other people could, right on deadline, and still have all the facts. So it always, the two parts of the brain trying to work at the same time is something that always fascinated me, because I felt that I was very good at either of them, but only so at making them come together on deadline. It was a constant battle to get everything right and be creative. I'd find myself too wooden sometimes, or I'd start writing creatively and I go like, oh God, I'm 6 graphs in and I haven't put a fact in yet. let's try getting the score in, that type of thing. So there's a real art and science to sports writing, especially column writing on deadline.
Well, I think you're being a little humble too, because just recently, you were named for the 11th time Connecticut Sportswriter of the Year. So you certainly figured out how to make those two parts of your brain work in cohesion, even on some horrible deadlines. And you've been doing it for many, many years. I basically think of you as a survivor, a survivor on deadlines, surviving the travel, the screaming matches with Jim Calhoun. Hell, you even survived 2 heart attacks, Jeff. Think about this.
Let me tell you, the worst one, I laugh now because it's been 18 years, but it was right around my 50th birthday, and it actually happened, started happening at the WNBA All-Star Game, which down at Mohegan Sun here in Connecticut, and I felt a lot of pain, but I went to the hospital, and they let me out, and I was a little iffy on that. But 2 days later, I had a massive heart attack right in my kitchen. And boy, I'll tell you, the younger you are, they tell me the more it hurts because you still have some like muscle mass. And it feels like this is gigantic. Everybody's had a muscle cramp running. It feels like this gigantic muscle cramp.
And you were 49 years old. This is 2005.
Yeah. But it had been in my family. My dad had one, a coronary in the late 40s. My grandfather died in the 50s. In his 50s, in the 1940s. So it's in the blood. But I'm laying there on the floor. I thought I was a goner. So I'm going to my wife. She's standing there. I'm going, honey, I'm so sorry for everything I've ever done wrong. And I love you so much and everything like that. And it was like, it's like a show. You think you're going down to like in a plane crash. This is it, But they came and they gave me a whole bunch of nitroglycerin, which kind of opened me up a little bit. They rushed me to the hospital. Then they put me in a helicopter to take me up to UMass. And I ended up having like a quadruple bypass and everything like that. And I lived. So I always kid my wife ever since. And when I go down for the count, honey, I got nothing left here to give you.
Didn't somebody write a letter to the Current about your heart attack?
Well, one guy emailed me that his only regret was that I had survived and didn't return to the University of Missouri. That was a little, even by our standards, you got to admit that's a little harsh.
I mean, the guy's wishing you death. Well, thankfully you survived that one in 2005. You survived another one in 2019 at age 64. And I'm so happy that you're with us and still writing. It's amazing to me that you're still grinding them out and still putting your heart into the matter.
I love being a storyteller, but I also love the controversy. I think I think the key to it is, and my uncle told me this, and he lived a long time, always remain curious.
Right.
Curiosity is the key to life. Curiosity is the key to staying involved and staying young, I think.
Well, I'm curious about one thing here, Jeff, and that's in the late 1970s, you were 22 years old, working for the Port Huron Times-Herald in Michigan, and you're covering an international hockey league game.
Oh, you're the man for digging this up.
The Port Huron Flags versus the Dayton Gems. Now, you talk about a rivalry. Port Huron versus Dayton. What happened that night?
All right. I grew up in New England, in Rhode Island. And Rhode Islanders, we're proud of being basketball and hockey fans at the same time. It seemed like so much of the country, it's like, oh, hockey this or basketball that. It's like we were at once basketball and hockey fans. So I'd watched the game for a long time, hockey. But I'm right out of college. And there was two fighters, Archie Henderson, who was like 6'6" on Port Huron. Actually, there was a line on Port Huron. Let's think about this. The one line had more than 1,000 penalty marks. Three guys. I could never find another
machine
line they were crazy. But anyway, Archie was one of them. And there was a bench clearing brawl. When you're talking about, slap shot, think slap shot. Okay, and I'm a young Dickie Dunn, right? and so they're fighting, and it's going around and around, and they were tired. Trognitz was exhausted.
This is Willie Trognitz from Dayton.
Willie Trognitz, yeah. He was on Dayton, and he was a fighter, and they had fought like to exhaustion. So, but Archie didn't have enough, so he came at Trognitz, and Trognitz had a stick, and just brought the stick right down on creased his nose and his forehead, cut him, broke his nose, gave him a concussion.
Like an axe. He took an axe to his head.
Yeah. He didn't bring it all the way back. Like who was I can't think of her. Lizzie Borden. Right? It was more like boom down from there, but it was hard, and he went down, and there was blood, and so I tried to cover it best I could. Went into the Dayton locker room. Started to ask Willie a few questions, and his teammates kind of like took me by the arms and kind of like carried me or escorted me out of the locker room.
Wait a minute, they carried you out of the locker room?
Yeah, like I don't know if my feet were touching the ground or not, right? They didn't. So it was in the commissioner of the league banned him for life.
Who, Willie?
From the league.
Willie got banned for life.
Yeah, Willie got banned for life. Of course, a week later, the World Hockey Association, where anything went, they signed him to the Cincinnati Stingers. But for 1 week, he was banned for life. And all of it, I come back and talk to my sports editor, and I think he thought that, like, oh boy, here's this young kid that, he saw a fight for the first time and was a little put off, But sure enough, it was real. And all of a sudden, like, Sports Illustrated and Newsday and all these different people were calling me up. And I'm going, wow, that's when I learned that things can spread in a hurry.
You know what I mean? Here I am by viral back before viral was a word.
Yeah, back right where it wasn't even a word, right? And so it's like, here I am, the only guy there at McMorran Place Arena, and all of a sudden, it's like all over the news nationally. So that was a wake-up call to me, like, wow. You never know when the 15 minutes are going to come.
Now, some guys might have been scared off by something like that. Why did you stick with it? What was it about that moment that said, you know what, this is for me?
That's a great question. I love the excitement of it. And I always love the excitement of it if I know what I'm talking about. There are some things, especially when you become a columnist, as you well know, you're out there covering the Olympics, and there's some events that you don't know anything about. Let's be honest, and you do your best homework going into it, but still, it's not. And so, if something like that happens, it's like, ooh boy, you hate that. You come down with the volume up to 10 on something you may not be an expert on to play it louder than a 3 or 4. But as long as I knew what I was talking about, I always enjoyed the excitement. I like the debate. And then it goes into an argument. Newport, Rhode Island, it's funny about Newport, Rhode Island. And when I tell them from there, people think of like mansions and like all these rich people. And certainly they're there, but there's a couple hundred rich people and 30,000 townies. And ladies and gentlemen, one of the 30,000 townies. And it's an old Navy town and a lot of lovable Irish Americans who are not afraid to go down to Thames Street and have a good time. So I kind of grew up in that environment of like having a good time and getting to a good argument. So I always enjoyed it. Having said that, though, I always admired and I watched, and I can't speak for other ones. I admire them and I distrust this aspect. They didn't seem to bother them that much. I'm talking about the columnists that might be getting into a big time arguments or all that. And they seemed almost immune from the criticism. Maybe they were buffaloing me. Maybe they weren't. But I always seemed to take it more, I don't want to use it personally, but I think I'm oversensitive to criticism a lot of times, even though I've had it a million times and I'm used to it. And I don't carry it for years or anything like that. But in the moment, you can sting me. Some people are hard as a shell, man, but it goes through about 3 layers of skin on me before I start toughening up and and stop it from hurting.
You also loved hockey, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you, hockey at the time was a way of getting into bigger newspapers because the sport was expanding. Mm-hmm. Remember, it was 6 NHL cities, and then where you are in Columbus, you now have a team, and we don't have one in Connecticut. But it was expanding, and I said, I feel this is an automatic that I could get to a major league team. And I loved all 4 sports, but I just saw hockey as an automatic. So it was at a time where it was a little unusual nationally. Maybe some cases it still is, but that's why I chose that one. That was just a professional choice. I knew it worked.
And it did work. It did work, because 2 years later, you were covering the Philadelphia Flyers, right?
Right. And first year in, they went on a 35-game unbeaten streak. 79-80, they ended up losing on a very controversial call to the Islanders. It was the Islanders' first year of their
in the Stanley Cup Finals, Game 6, right?
Yeah, Game 6. You know what's really funny about that, Todd, was I was so engrossed in that the 1980 Olympic thing,
Miracle on Ice,
didn't have as big an impact on me as it would later, or as it did on America at the time. I was so I'm going like, those guys the Flyers would wipe the deck with those guys. Altogether missing the cultural significance of it all. Thank you very much.
You were all in on the team you were covering.
I was all in on that 35-game unbeaten streak, which stands to this day, by the way, 25-0-10.
Think about that, 35 in a row you don't lose.
I got a story on the night.
All right, let's hear it.
Ended in Bloomington, Minnesota, of all places. The Minnesota North Stars. Before it went downtown, the stadium and the arena were out there in Bloomington near the airport, and it was cold. And I still was using a typewriter at the end, with the fax and things stuff. So it was a relatively short walk from the arena to the hotel. Across a gigantic, it was a big parking lot, but it was a relatively short walk. But it was also like 0 degrees. And true to my ways, I was sweating on deadline. And as I walked carrying the typewriter Boy, I haven't told this story in a long time. As I walked across the big parking lot to the hotel, I got into the hotel and I discovered that my hand had frozen to the handle. You know, like in the Christmas story where the kid's tongue sticks to the pole? My hand was stuck to the typewriter handle. And I was absolutely panicked. And I'm talking about 2-3 minutes. I'm going, where do I go, to the hospital?
Wait a minute, you're lugging around typewriter stuck to your hand?
In my hand, and it wasn't giving off. So finally, I walk up to the guy at the desk, right? And he goes, oh, no problem. He walks me over to the wall heater and puts me down next to it. And sure enough, just gave way. And I go, oh man, I'm so embarrassed. He goes, don't be. You'd be surprised how many people hands get stuck to things in the ice. So I didn't feel as stupid.
Was that a Marriott? A lot of sports writers were staying there?
Yes, it was a Marriott in the Marriott, Bloomington Marriott.
So a lot of sports writers had experienced this.
Yes. So that's how the 35-game unbeaten streak ended, with my hand stuck to a typewriter.
That's one of the craziest things I've heard. Well, hockey had those crazy moments, those experiences, the passion, the characters. You covered so many years. You did 11 years on the beat with the Hartford Whalers. But Whalers aside, in hockey in general, what was it about the sport that was so much fun to cover back in those days? Well, it was their money lagged way behind. I remember looking at some of the salaries those guys, they didn't make them public at those times, but some of them you'd hear, and guys making $140,000 scoring 40 goals and stuff. There was some Marcel Dion, some of the Kings and some of the Rangers made some money, $300,000-$400,000, but everybody was woefully underpaid. But I think that also led to a certain amount of humility. That and the Canadian spirit, especially the Western guys, very humble, used to getting up at early in the morning and milking cows in the frozen weather. And so there's a lot to admire about those guys. They were rough and tumble, a lot of them, but there was also real humility about them and a kindred spirit. And I think that's changed some over the years, as I've seen a lot. The money's as the money's gotten bigger, they're not immune to acting like a lot of the other sports. But part of that was and also it was. I think you probably speak to this in Columbus in a way, as far as like the team and stuff. It's not like New York and Boston where there are a million people that covered it. So I was traveling alone a lot of times. And so things I'd never write or say, I saw, and things I'd have to make a decision on what I'd write and say. It was like, think about this. Ray Ferraro is now, he's national television announcer he was up in Canada, now he's down here in the States and everything. He was a quote machine. And guys would complain to me to interview them more because I quoted Ray too much. Think about that. They run away from reporters nowadays, right? Now I had guys like arguing for me to quote them more in the paper. That is something you would never see. And maybe never even saw it at that time in the larger cities, but cover. I mean, I was on a commercial flight one day and a defenseman, Doug Huda, was all of a sudden throwing $20 bills at me from his per diem. And it was a commercial flight. And the money's coming over. And he's going, how much do I have to pay you for you to write one nice thing about me? And Frank Peter Angelo, who was the goalie at the time, was sitting right behind me. He goes, pick the money up, Jeff. Take it, keep it. And I look over the lady next to me, and I go, I don't know if you know who we are. And she goes, oh, I know. We were flying out of Hartford to like out on a West Coast trip. So it was like, and that's how close it was, though. You know what I mean? You just see people at bars and things like that, and it was a different time. Well, it was also different in Hartford, right? So the Whalers are there for 23 years, and they came over from the WHL originally as the New England Whalers. WJ, and they to become the Hartford Whalers. You started covering them as a beat writer in 1984 and did it for 11 more years. Right.
Right.
The relationship between Hartford and the city was special, right?
Yeah, I always say this. I say, why didn't it work? Well, I said, well, Hartford itself is not necessarily a major league city. It's not. Connecticut's a major league state, as you find out how big Yukon Nation is and everything like that. So, but people in certain suburbs of Hartford, they bought season tickets better than Canadians did. Avon, Farmington, Glastonbury, the people were so invested in it. And it was before Yukon really hit big in the 80s. So, I mean, they won one playoff round. They had a parade.
Really?
You don't find, yeah.
Wow.
That always, it was in the Adamsers. Now, I like to say I was in the Adamsers, Buffalo, Boston, Montreal, Quebec. So I knew all those towns. I used to have an Adams Division wallet. American money on one thing divided by Canadian money on the other side. But the Montreal Canadiens, who had been, that's like the New York Yankees stuff. Those guys like Larry Robinson and Bob Gainey, they were always amazed. Like, you had to win the Stanley Cup in Montreal at that time just to break even. And they go, they had a parade for winning one round? I go, absolutely. And it was great.
Well, it was great until, I think, 1991, they made one of the most infamous trades in hockey history when general manager Eddie Johnson decided to trade the franchise's best player ever, Ron Francis, and Ulf Samuelsson to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
You were around that. That just must have shook everybody in town.
Yeah, it turned out when you talk about classic bad trades in the sport, that was it. I mean, the Penguins won 2 Stanley Cups. Ron Francis went to Hall of Fame, and I think he was like the 4th or 5th leading scorer when he retired. But he was just a rock as a person. I always say this. People ask me, who are the nicest people you covered? In Connecticut, you always have to have a male and a female athlete, because we are very big on women's sports. Ron Francis and Rebecca Lobo are the 2 nicest people.
Really?
But yeah, it crushed the franchise. It never quite recovered, and there was just a series of mishaps there. Chris Pronger turned out to be a Hall of Famer. He got traded, but before he did, he was a top round pick. Like 7 of them got arrested for a gigantic bar fight.
You're around a lot of hockey fights, Jeff. Didn't you? Weren't you once at a fight? You saw a hockey fight at Chuck's Steakhouse at a mall?
Oh, yeah. Well, unfortunately, it was Ace Bailey who died in 9/11.
Great Boston
Ace Bailey
Bruin.
was a Bruins player. Yeah, Boston Bruins. And he then worked as a head scout for Los Angeles, but he still lived in Boston. So he'd come down to Hartford a lot. You watch the games in Boston and in Hartford. You could knock out a lot of teams by doing that. So he's stopping at Chuck's house. I knew him a little bit. And one night, he's in, they got each other by the necks, these 2 guys. And they're yelling at him. Finally, I looked at the guy, a fan I'd seen around, big Whalers fan. I go like, don't you know that's Ace Bailey? And the guy goes, hey, let me buy you a beer. They went from right at each other's neck, ready to go, a pure brawl. And next thing you saw, he's got his arm around him, wanting to buy him a drink. Yeah, as the New York Rangers fans like to remind the Whalers, they used to come up in the Bruins when they didn't sell out. They'd have they buy up the upper ring up there and make for like a sellout, but they chant things. And the Rangers fans used to chant like you play in a shopping mall, because anybody's been to Hartford, they used to be like it was attached to a shopping mall. So I mean, and then all of a sudden you play in a shopping mall, and then if anybody knows anything on the Rangers, all of a sudden the minute they go like, Potvin sucks. That was
that's always a great comeback, right?
That's right. That's it. They're chanting. You're playing a shopping mall. All of a sudden, went to they magically knew to chant Potvin sucks. They'll do that now. 30 years later.
Well, you see Ace Bailey fighting a fan in a steakhouse in the mall. So I mean, that kind of sums up the way the hockey is built on passion, and now they went from fighting to hugging. But I think the relationship of the city and the passion for, the town really hit home when all of a sudden the ownership group, led by Peter Carmanos, decided they're going to leave Hartford. And by this time, you're a columnist and not on the beat, but you're putting your opinion out there, and you're really having to fight for the city, right? What was that like as a young columnist trying to take on an issue like that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I found myself, because you could make an argument that the Winnipegs, they've recovered. Quebec hasn't gotten on. Hartford, that it was the thing that was so tough about Hartford was not the size; it was that we're squeezed by Boston and New York. You know what I mean? So you have people that are UConn fans, and they might be Bruins fans, they might be Rangers fans, depending on what time of the state. They're either Red Sox or Yankee fans. That's always crazy with us. Patriots or Giants fans. So we were squeezed by lack of living space, and that always hurt. And but at the same time, I felt obliged, and I think rightfully so, to stick up for the city. And then at the end, the governor, who later spent a couple stints in jail, John Rowland, and who fought like crazy to bring the Patriots here unsuccessfely a couple years later. He wasn't a big hockey fan. Unlike Lowell Weicker, he of Watergate hearings, the famous Lowell Weicker, and later became our governor, who once called. I'm one of the few guys that ever got called across the street into the state capitol to come in, call me in, goes, the governor calls me and goes, Jeff, sit down. The Whalers are not leaving on my watch. Now get out of here. The governor of the state, he was like the previous governor. So you don't often get called in to the governor's office. He was a huge hockey fan. His son was a goalie. It turns
out they did leave. Carmanos moved it to Carolina.
Yeah,
they're now the Carolina Hurricanes, and they left April 13, 1997. That last game, what was that like to cover?
People were crying, signs. But they had reacquired Kevin Dineen, who played in Columbus. He was a heart and soul guy in the 80s. He went and played in the Flyers for a while, and he came back, and he scored the last goal, and he spoke to the crowd. So it was like John Wayne in the Alamo, you know what I mean? And he was going down. He was going down with everybody. It was so sad. I mean, that's the only thing I could think about how sad it was. They played Tampa Bay, which wasn't particularly, if it was being fitting, they would have played the Bruins or the Canadians or something, but still, it was just sad. And that was it. And people go, oh, well, we covered minor league this and that. Town never really recovered. Was replaced by UConn as a state entity, but the town was never the same.
Well, the Whalers still have a booster club that's still alive, and there's still the song, the Brass Bonanza, the Whalers team song, the fight song. What's the story with that?
Todd, it's more famous than the team now. Everywhere, people just talk about it. They buy the vintage jerseys. And it was a song that was originally used as a filler between those, the albums they used to have in the old days of like season highlights, and they'd have like, Yaz hit a home run, right. and they had some music filler, and that was the song. And the guy who got it, they liked it, and they decided that maybe they'll use some introductory music at the games and after they scored goals.
Right.
So it was always uniquely Hartford. Some people made fun of it. Brian Burke, who came in, thought it was minor league. But anyway, it just, even after they left, it was being played at 2004 Red Sox when they won the World Series. I hear it everywhere. And so the same day in my life, this was an earth-shattering day. I got an iPhone, I got on Facebook, and I got Twitter, all on the same day. My daughter said, your head's going to explode. Well, anyway, 2 weeks, I've been searching for the guy who wrote this song. He disappeared into Europe. And I got on Facebook and found him in Belgium. He was like, he's since passed, but he's like an 88-year-old guy named Jacques Assea. And he went by the name Jack Say on the thing with Brass Bonanza. So I found him. People were looking for him for like 30 years, and I found him with it. He was in Belgium. He didn't speak English. He spoke French. He spoke a little English, and he was like a grandson of a famous classical musician. I'm talking like top 200 all time, back from like 19th century. But like I found 2 weeks. And then everybody's going, I told you this social media stuff is going to work. I held out. I didn't have an iPhone. I had a little flip phone, no iPhone, no Twitter, no Facebook. 2 weeks, I find Jacques Cassay. So it's like I'm famous for that, believe it or not. I don't know if I should be proud of it, but it was. I found him. He was 88 years old and living in Belgium.
That shows your diligence, right? Hey, can you give us a little brass bonanza?
All right. Dun 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 dun.
That's wonderful. Well, like you mentioned, Hartford, it is squeezed by Boston and New York. Boston's like 100 miles away. New York's like 120, I believe. But as a columnist, that also opened up your world to other topics, right?
Oh.
So you went from being a hockey beat writer to now you've got a bigger canvas to paint on. And not only that, but with Boston and New York, during your tenure at the Hartford Courant especially, you have the Yankees with Derek Jeter winning 5 World Series. You have the Red Sox breaking the curse, winning 4 World Series. You have the Patriots with Belichick and Brady winning 6 Super Bowls. I mean, you had so much. You were covering royalty, Jeff.
Oh, yeah. And the weirdest thing, Todd, was this, is that when you're in a regional thing, you're just not as big as some of those other writers. You had Bob Ryan, Dan Shaughnessy, and you had Lupica and all the New Yorkers and all that. And I always felt, and I always said this, I could write something so good or so bad or so spastic, and nobody would say boo. But misplace a comma about UConn, and my whole world would blow up. So it was really weird. I had to learn to you had all these talk radios at these gigantic metropolises of New York and Boston, and you had where I was at. So it was. I always call it keeping your hands on the volume. And sometimes I did a better job than others. It was okay to let it loose in New York if you thought that, because who's going to scream louder than the New York Post, right? You go, who's going to scream louder than Boston Sports Radio? So there was nothing that I was going to say or do that would be so audacious that was going to shake my world. But on the other hand, you have to come back the next night and write about the UConn women or something like that. And it's like, you better be careful, right, Buster. You better be careful. Your world's going to explode.
That's the difference between regional and hyper-local.
Yeah. My views didn't change. I was really honest to my views. But you had to be careful on the volume.
When you think about all those great championship moments for Boston and New York that you were covering as a regional columnist, is there one in particular that sticks out?
Well, certainly the 2004 curse of the Red Sox was truly unbelievable.
When they broke the curse, won the World Series, beat the Cardinals.
Yeah, it shook people in Connecticut too. The same as the fan. A lot of the 2004 was about the fans. So the fans in Connecticut were as invested as the fans in Massachusetts or New Hampshire. So a lot of that was a lot of people. I can die happy now and all those things. But when the Red Sox and the Yankees won against each other, the Connecticut was split. So the biggest idiot I was to the fans was not writing about their team when they played, for it all. And they played a lot against each other, and it got really heated. So you could call them bad or lousy, but as long as you wrote about them, be like, Jacobs, what are you writing about the Red Sox for when, Wade Boggs has got... So, that's where I learned ignoring people is the biggest sin you can commit against them. Not writing horrible things about them. So that was interesting to me. We'd call it the Mason-Nixon line and things like that. So we got Jim Mason, Trot Nixon, and things like that. And I could go right through the towns with you where the line was. You could build a wall. Although I will say there were certain Yankee fans of Italian heritage that was passed down to the family through being DiMaggio fans and Yogi Berra fans. They were that was the same as in Rhode Island.
Well, how did you make that decision?
I really tried to pick the best story. You know how you root for the best story? Like, that's real true. So I was doubly rooting for the best story, for the best story itself, and God, let me pick the right town to write about.
Well, you mentioned about the regional aspect of writing about the Red Sox, the Patriots, the Yankees, the whole Boston and New York thing as a columnist in Connecticut. But then there's the hyper-local. And during your time in Connecticut, nothing became bigger than Connecticut basketball, University of Connecticut, men and women. Jim Calhoun built the men's program. Geno Auriemma obviously built the women's program. Let's start with the women. You know, Geno's in his 38th season. Incredible. 11 national titles, 22 Final Fours, 14 in a row. What has it been like to see that come to life all these years?
I covered all their, they've won 11 national championships. I covered 10 of them. The one I didn't cover was the very first one because they won it in 1995 and I was still doing the Whalers. So it took them about a decade to really get going. And when they first hit, it was in 94, 95, the New York media, especially New York Times, Sports Illustrated, they really hopped on board. They were the right team at the right time and the right coach to really, really help that sport expand. And I looked at him sort of as in a fascinating way. They became a phenomenon. And so he won first, and he's just a remarkable person.
Geno.
Geno, yeah. He can tell stories. You sit at the bar with him, you can listen. He's very generous. You cross him, and it can go bad. I only had one truly ugly scenario with him, was that he staged the basket for Nikisha Sales to become the all-time scorer at UConn. She had blown out her Achilles.
She got hurt. She gets hurt. She's like 1 point shy of the record, and then they engineered something with the opposing coach.
She came out on crutches after the opening tip down in Villanova. I wasn't there, and I was not there because it was at there. It was not a powerful game, and but I wrote that night, and I wrote, talk about hitting 10 on the volume. Her name was Nikisha Sales. I mentioned Soupy Sales and like squirting a thing, and because I hate stage stuff like that. But he saw it as like, as I told him, he saw it as a bouquet of roses. I saw it as a chia pet, and the fans, a lot of them were older. A lot of them were older fans. They went crazy. When I'm talking about crazy, I'm talking about crazy. It's the hottest thing I've ever gotten into. More people wrote letters to the editor off that than during the Watergate investigations in the 70s. They had a complete special section of the letters.
Really? Wait a minute. The Current runs a special section basically trashing you?
Yeah, but you know what? The managing editor. There were a lot of people at the paper that didn't like me because they a lot of people saw them as their girls. They didn't. It's not now so much, but back then it was a real phenomena. But the managing editor cut me $1,000 check on it just to make sure that I wasn't feeling too bad about it. So I appreciated that. There were people at the paper that were sniping me, and the letter to the editors were just so entertaining because they came from kids and older people, and so it was like a special section. And an elder lady found my phone call, and she called up and goes, "I'm gonna kick your ass." She was like 82 years old. It was tremendous. Although I might not say that if she found me.
My understanding is that after the season, this led to a 4-hour debate between you and Geno. Is that correct? 4 hours?
Yes, we met for 4 hours in his office. And the thing, he never came off his point. I found myself like giving the volume speech and, the roading. I didn't want to go too far because I really believed it. But I had to go to the bathroom twice while we were there. He never moved. I was always impressed. Guy was in for 4 hours, just never moved from his seat. But he was like just airtight on that. He was right on that one. And I'm not sure to this day that he's ever, we get along fine, great, but I'm not sure he's ever forgiven me that part of it. But that was the most, really, in Connecticut, that's the thing I'm most famous for, the Keisha Sales incident.
Do you think about it differently now when you look back on it?
Might have turned the volume down from a 10 to a 7. I read it though. I go like, boy, was I a young columnist and pugnacious.
Well, you mentioned Geno was the right guy at the right time with that team. Obviously, they had so many great players over the years. They still do. 26 All-Americans, Brianna Stewart, Maya Moore. You can go on and on. Amazing talent.
Yeah, Sue Bird.
It really all gets back to Geno. Why was he the right guy then? You mentioned that you could sit in a bar and talk. He was selling the game, right?
Yeah, he has, his mom, who recently passed, was a very powerful personality in his life, a force. She was like from Italy. She hid out from the Nazis in Italy during World War II. I loved it. She's like, one time in 2000 in Philadelphia, she was throwing holy water at the girls when they came out. So she was a great. But so he's really able to connect with women and men. He's a guy's guy, and yet he can connect so well with women. And his ability to motivate and to connect with people is as good as I've ever seen. And he's an offensive coach. That's what I like about him. He loves to create, you know what I mean, and he loves to do things. So he's I really like that about him. And as he gets older now, he's sort of like just an icon now. And the early Geno was really just a dude. Calhoun was way bigger than Geno when they came in through the 80s and stuff like that. And Calhoun wasn't that nice to him. And people always ask me, whose side do you take? I say, well, there's the famous Jim and the Jim that came in, and the famous Geno and the Geno that came in. The only one I feel sorry for was Geno that came in, because he had to fight through some stuff that Calhoun wasn't great to him. And now he's big as life, Geno. So he's a big boy. But my favorite moment was him. He had 3 players, including Brianna Stewart, that I just remember they won all those games in a row, and they won 4 national championships. They came in, and I think we were in Indianapolis, and he came in. He just hugged all 3 of them at one time, and I was sitting right there. I could have touched him. It was surreal. Brianna Stewart, she just ran the table. She came in, won them all. That's all. Four championships to win. She won them all. And then and Geno was there hugging the 3 of them at one time. It was very powerful, very powerful.
Well, I think about just the ability to keep something going. You build it. Building something is great, right? That's amazing. But then you got to chase perfection and keep it going. And the fact that the women at Connecticut, those players, all those great players, all the coaches, and Geno, they've kept that going. That's just an amazing thing to witness.
It is. He's tough in practice. Chris Daly, as associate, has been there all the time. She's a great recruiter. She's just like, she could have been, I like to kid her, she could have been a nun in a different lifetime. She's in charge of like the discipline and because the women that come in, they just don't have much problems there. They all, like I said, they win all the games. They make all the honor rolls, and then they go on and do great things in life. They've had very few problems. And Chris is behind a lot of that. Geno's more of a big picture guy in terms of the media and stuff. But at practice, you see them working together, and they're very basketball oriented. And I said that I was happy for him that he went to the Olympics and won. And coached all the best players. He had the best players and all that. But just the way he just went out and proved. And I always thought he could have coached men if he wanted to.
You mentioned Calhoun, and Jim Calhoun built the men's program when there really wasn't much there. He comes in and he turns that into a national program. Now, you had a 4-hour debate with Geno once. What was your relationship like with Calhoun?
Tumultuous. I will say. Bobby Clark, who was a god in Philadelphia Flyers, from the tough days. He and Jim Calhoun are the worst losers I ever saw. Calhoun was a horrible loser. And my one rap on him always was he really just didn't treat the media well after he lost games and stuff. He just should have done a better job. Well, there's 2 famous ones that everybody knows about. That not a dime back. a guy came in who was not a regular beat reporter, and he was pressing buttons, and he was asking about state money and stuff like that, and that's where Calhoun went off him. And then Dave Solomon, who passed, who was a sports columnist at the New Haven Register, and knew it was closer to Calhoun than I was, asked him about Ryan Gomes, and that's where he let go about a zillion F-bombs. You know, you only say I effed up, I effed up. He was yelling. That's one's on the those two are on the internet for immortality. But he goes, I got Emeka Okafor and I got Karan Butler. I didn't get Ryan Gomes, who was a kid from Waterbury. It really was a little pudgy coming out of high school. And he turned out to be a great player, and he went to NBA. But he went off that day. But it was just a lot of the small stuff, like you ask a question after a loss. I can't remember everything about it, but it was harsh, snide remarks. And I always thought he was better than that. And I will say, though, there was one Jim Calhoun from the opening buzzer to the completion of the press conference. Away from it, he's an interesting dude. He's a smart guy, really engaging. Yeah, I had it out with it. But you know what's really weird is that, I don't know, people know that he came back after retirement, coached Division III basketball,
Joseph's.
right, for 3 years.
In West Hartford.
St. Joseph's, who was ranked number 1 in the country with Glenn Miller, who was a coach with him.
Yeah, 5 years. He retires from Connecticut in 2012. 5 years later, he comes back to coach and start a program, St. Joseph's, a D3.
Yeah. And after all these things I'd gone with him, the height of the problem with me was 2006. A guy named Marcus Williams. They lost. That was the year that they lost to George Mason. Remember, they were upset. They thought they could win a national title there. 2006, they lost in the regional finals. But a guy, Marcus Williams, a guard, star guard, he was involved in stealing laptops, and I thought he should have been gone for the year. And Jim let him back after the non-conference season. So that was a source of a lot of consternation. But anyway, he retires. I wrote a story about how he'd thrown up all over the inside of the coach's office at Madison Square Garden after a big loss. He claims it was orange soda. But anyway, he retires, comes back, and this is crazy. My son, Liam, was all-state, a second-team all-state basketball player. And he went and played D3 ball at LaSalle, which is in the same league as Jim Calhoun's St. Joseph's team. And so my son played against Jim Calhoun. But it was by that time, Jim and I became buddies over talking D3 basketball. And I remember looking at him, I go like, Jim, who would have known we'd just be arguing like crazy about Syracuse, but we became buddies over Albertus Magnus, you know? So, like, he and I have really, you know, he's retired. I haven't talked to him in like a year or so, but like, he and I get along just grand. And I like to think that, and one thing I will say about Jim, he won the 12 rounds. I mean, you know, he went until he couldn't go any further. He never took the shortcuts. And he loved basketball so much. They came back, he was a Hall of Fame. He comes back as a D3 coach. So, you know, like, right? Seeing that shows you, like, and then my kids playing. I mean, you know who played against Jim Calhoun or played for him? You know, Ray Allen, blah, blah. And all of a sudden he's out there coaching his mind out, and my kid's on the other team. It was like, I said, this dude loves basketball. So I got a different view of Jim Calhoun now than I did 15 years ago.
When he won those championships at Connecticut, 1999, 2004, 2011, how did you view him then compared to how you view him now?
Oh, well, in 1999, I didn't have much problem. So the 1999 first championship, because he had made some runs at the Final Four and not made it. And he won out in Phoenix to get into the Final Four. It was the only time I ever saw him cry in a side room. I was in there. Bill Plaschke from the LA Times was in there, just a few people. It was the only time I ever saw him cry. And when he won in 99, it was bigger than life here in Connecticut. I think like 55% of the television sets were on the night that they beat Duke down there in St. Petersburg. It was huge. I can't even, you know, it was like, it was big. And I'm trying to think about that. He was, I just think about Khalid El-Amin rushing I was sitting right behind the TV guys. He said, we shocked the world. And he was it was just such a breakthrough for him. And then when he went to 04, he had a great team with Okafor, Ben Gordon. They were the best team. 11, they kind of snuck in. They, and they won over, I can't think of their name. What's the school? Butler. And, by that time, I did not have as good a relationship. I remember going up to him and making a point of, congratulating him right at the time and everything like that. So it was off and on. And I viewed him at that point as just a guy. He was up there, when he won his third. A lot of people won one or two, but to win his third.
Well, then he's up there with Wooden, Rupp, Knight, Krzyzewski. Yeah. Right? Those are the names you're with now.
Yeah. You can't deny it. And then the wins. So he's up there as one of the greatest coaches ever. He certainly built he might be as great a builder of a program as ever. I mean, same with Geno on the women's side. But he's a complex. I mean, as I like to say about Calhoun, he's a 700-page Russian novel. There's a lot of ups and downs, slow going, fast going, and so you kind of just got to stick in there. You know what I mean? And some days there's lots of roses, and a lot of days there's some punches. It's
interesting that you guys are now at the point where you're older, and the pressure's different. He just he retired this year again for the final time from St. Joseph's.
Right. Just the D3 aspect of it, just the basketball aspect of it. Good enough to be something, but not so big that it was like it consumed everybody's mind. And he was still out there coaching, yelling at officials. It's like I'm sitting in the stands and he's yelling about some hack that my kid had that got away with. I felt like yelling. He didn't touch him, but
it came full circle. He went from yelling at you to yelling about your kid.
Right.
Well, I think that shows the passion. I think you can relate to that, right? The passion.
Oh yeah. As I will say this, as I looked at this over the years, I realized that if I was a coach, I probably would have been a lot closer to the way he acted on the sidelines than the way John Wooden acted on the sidelines. So I also thought about maybe not firing those rocks from a glass house in a motion. Oh, yeah.
I always think about how would I have reacted to some of my own questions or something that I wrote.
Right.
Well, I think that passion is something that I've always admired in you, Jeff. It's been a lot of fun to reconnect and share some of the great stories that you have encountered in your wonderful career. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Todd. I really do appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for listening to Press Box Access. You can find us here with a new episode every other Wednesday. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. We'd love for you to review us. 5 stars would be nice. Follow us on social media. Drop us an email at pressboxaccess@gmail.com. And be sure to spread the word. Everyone is welcome here. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to executive producers Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando, producer Bill Huffman, and our audio engineer, Nathan Corson. I'm your host, Todd Jones. It's closing time. Rock on.
Women's Running Stories, where we explore the intersection between running and life. Because every woman who is committed to a running journey has a story to tell, and this is where you'll find those stories. I am host and producer Cherie Louise Turner. I'm a 53-year-old runner, and together with original music by musician and runner Cormac O'Regan, we bring these inspirational stories to life. Please join us to fuel your adventures.